And the title of his speech is a tribute to Sallie.
Thank you. Fellow Toastmasters and welcome guests, a tribute to Sallie Boggs. How can you thank someone who is taking you from crayons to perfume?
I knew you would do that.
Oh my God. I'm sorry, I must have grabbed your notes. Sorry, Shaq, I must have picked them up by mistake when I was sitting there. Okay. Now, seriously, whenever I first joined Toastmasters, they thought I was brain dead. Jay, I'm sorry. No, seriously, folks. Sallie Boggs is past district governor, so she has not been around as much as she normally was over the last year and a half. And it was during that time that it was different. Instead of being browbeaten every time I gave a speech, after, I heard, not always, but mostly, "Oh, nice speech, good job, look forward to hearing your next speech." But it was one of these speeches that I gave at the contest where it was about love, and where I had the end, I didn't have an ending for it. I had the ending go over time to make a point about the speech. But the truth is that I really didn't have enough material. I really didn't understand much about love. I think the only one that enjoyed that speech, I know Sallie did not enjoy it because I was disqualified, but Jay enjoyed it because he got to move on to the next level.
I like your definition of love too.
And I'll never forget, it was a warm summer evening, and we stood right out here on the sidewalk. Sallie Boggs, myself, and Jay Schaefer. You see, Sallie Boggs had just finished her term as district governor, and instead of getting her back to a normal schedule of coming to our meetings, she told us that she was leaving for good. So we stood outside here on the sidewalk on a warm summer's night. Sallie was facing this way, Jay and I on both ends, firing questions at her, trying to ascertain information, what's going on, when are you leaving, what about this, what about that. And very soon, the questions turned to more of an interrogation. And the questions we were asking seemed to have a common theme about values in material things, like, what are you going to do about your fish? And she answered, well, I'm thinking about donating. Well, what about your house? Well, I'm just going to have to sell. Well, what about Toastmasters? Well, I'll just start another group whenever I get up to Maine. Well, what about this? What about that? And we were firing questions, and it became very obvious that her answer was that she only cared about making sure her best friend was safe. And that was really the only decision she had made. Everything else had no value whatsoever to her. She made up her mind what she was going to do, make sure her best friend was safe and where they could live together and be happy. And that's exactly what she did. And I remember walking away on that evening thinking that I got a glimpse, a window of what love must be like. That it was surely something that I would like to inspire to. I would like to have something towards that in my life. And now I'd just like to tell you a little story. It's a story about an old woman who enjoyed sitting at the edge of the water watching the fish. On this particular fall day, she gathered up some pieces of bread and she went to her usual spot, and she sat at the edge of the water watching the fish. And as she sat there, she noticed something glimmering in the water close to the edge. So she reached down, and it was a jewel. It was a gem. And she knew, after she cleaned it off, that it was very valuable. So she set the gem down and continued on watching the fish. Shortly after, a stranger walked down the path, approaching her. The stranger was very hungry, and he asked the woman if he could have a piece of bread. And as the woman stood up to break off a piece of bread to give to him, the jewel fell to the ground at her feet. She handed the stranger the piece of bread, and the stranger asked, "May I have that jewel, that gem?" The stranger was no gemologist, but it was very apparent that this gem was worth quite a bit of money, and he would be set for life. He would be able to buy the house he wanted. He would be able to travel. He would never have to worry about working again. And the woman reached down, picked up the gem, and handed it to the stranger. The stranger walked away, and the old woman sat back down on the bench. She watched the fishes go by. The very next day, there came a knock at the door. The old woman opened the door, and the stranger was standing there. She was quite surprised, and what happened next surprised her more. He handed her the gem back. She was very surprised. She said, "Why?" He told her, he says, "I want something more valuable from you than this gem." She was beside herself. She said, "I have nothing more valuable. I have nothing." He said, "Oh, but you do." He says, "I want that which allowed you to give me that gem in the first place." And that is what Sallie Boggs gave to us. Does anyone here know how long District 13 has been around? How many years?
It's about 60 years.
It is about 60 years. Very good answer. Does anyone here know how many times that has been distinguished 3 times in a row? Once before this last time. This is the 2nd time. Very
I
good.
didn't know that.
Many, many years ago, in the very beginning, it was distinguished 3 times in a row. Now, I know a lot of people put a lot of work into making District 13 distinguished, but I have not heard anyone say that it was merely a coincidence that Sallie Boggs was a part of the 3 governing people for the last 3 years when it made distinguished for the 3rd time in a row, and she just finished being district governor. That is quite an accomplishment, and she worked that to the very midnight of the very last day. Seriously, she was up that night getting things done at the very last second before she finally finished all the work that she had done, that she had to do, and it paid off for all of us. So, in recognition of all the great work and everything she's given us, we would like to ask her for one more favor. And that favor is of an official nature, so I will leave that to our president. And again, just like in my contest speech, this speech does not have an ending. There's already talk that some people are talking about getting together and making a trip up the Main. And I hear that the lobster prices are really down now. Toastmasters.
Good evening, our area governors.